Thank you for coming to this event of the Bologna Institute for Policy Research. My name is Sergey Radchenko. I'm the academic director of this venerable institution, i.e. Bologna Institute of Policy Research. And I'm very delighted today to have with us Vladimir Ashurkov, who is an executive, or rather he's the board member of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which of course is known to anyone who has followed Russian politics for the last more than 10 years. Anti-Corruption Foundation is associated with the name of Alexei Navalny, who is the leader of the Russian opposition, currently in prison in Russia. And of course, those of you who follow the news would know that the documentary Navalny just received an Oscar award for the best documentary. If you haven't watched it, please do. We thought for at first that maybe we could launch the document or do viewing here or something, but it just did not make sense to do that because it is a long documentary. You can get it on Amazon Prime if you have Amazon Prime. I certainly would highly recommend it. It's a very touching film. It's touching, especially for those of us who are connected to Russia in some way. And people like me, I have followed the drama of the Russian opposition for many years as a spectator more than an activist. I'm not an activist myself, although when I did find myself in Moscow in 2019, I actually participated in some of the marches, and it was a very vile affair. The so-called unsanctioned marches in August 2019, where the police were in huge presence throughout the city and were just beating the hell out of protesters. It was a terrible ordeal, terrible affair. And that reminded me of just the sheer brutality of Putin's regime, which of course we have come to understand much more now that it has expressed itself so aggressively in foreign policy by invading Ukraine in February 2022. Now, unlike me, Vladimir has been involved in this from the start. He has been closely working with Alexei Navalny for many years. He's now in exile, effectively, in Europe, like many brave Russian activists, members of the Russian opposition. Many members of the Anti-Corruption Foundation. Of course, the Anti-Corruption Foundation was declared an extremist organization in Russia when Navalny returned after his poisoning with Novichok. When he returned, was declared extremist, and members of the Anti-Corruption Foundation were effectively forced into exile or arrested. And many of them are here in Europe, and so we're very, very pleased to have Vladimir with us today, alongside or before his work for Anti-Corruption Foundation. He also had a very distinguished banking career. So he's both a businessman and also a political activist. So with this, I will turn the floor over. Vladimir, welcome to SAIS, welcome to SAIS Europe, welcome to Bologna. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's really a historic day for me that Navalny documentary received the most prestigious film award in the world just last night. And we have watched the very touching speech of the acceptance speech by Yulia Navalny, wife of Alexei Navalny, who expressed words of support for him. Navalny, who is the subject of this movie, is the most prominent Russian opposition politician, and he is arguably the most famous political prisoner in the world right now. And I have been privileged to work with him and with our team for more than 10 years. I will share some of my experience and my thoughts on the situation. It's a strange thing how I ended up here a few years ago. I started following Sergey on Twitter.
This is a dangerous proposition, just to say.
And it was suggested to me by a friend, and I was really fascinated by the insights of Professor Radchenko into Russian politics and to world politics, and his balanced view really appealed to me. So we met in London, and he invited me to speak here at this premier institution dealing with international affairs, and I'm very glad for that. I will speak, there's a lot to cover. I will speak in bullet points so that we have more time for questions and answers. So if something that I say is not clear and you're more interested in that, please don't hesitate to ask. A little bit of an introduction. I was born in Moscow. Most of my career has been in finance and investments. I went to business school in the States, University of Pennsylvania. Then I had a variety of jobs in finance in Russia. And then I never was a member of any political party, but I was always interested in government and politics. And in 2009, I started reading a blog by a young lawyer, Alexei Navalny, who was writing about cases of corruption in large Russian state companies. And his approach really appealed to me because he wasn't just talking about corruption in Russia, because many people do, but he was trying to do something about it. He was launching lawsuits against most powerful Russian corporations. He was making complaints to all state agencies, and he was writing about it with a humor and self-irony that were really quite appealing. So I wrote to him in the beginning of 2010. I said, well, I have a lot of experience in finance and corporate governance. Let me help you in my spare time. And so we met, and we really resonated. So our collaboration started. Because of my involvement with Navalny in 2012, I had to resign from my corporate job, and I focused on my civil and political activities. And in 2014, it became not safe. After the annexation of Crimea, it became not safe for me and my family to remain in Russia. So we moved to London, and I have been working with the Navalny team from London since then for almost 9 years. My mandate within the organization has traditionally been strategy, coordination of our political and economic program, media relations with Western media, with relations with opinion leaders, business people, artists, writers, and fundraising, both in terms of working with large donors and creating the infrastructure for our crowdfunding. So Anti-Corruption Foundation, what is it? It emerged as the most prominent Russian civil and political organization. Let me give you a few words about how we operate and on what assumptions and what our strategy has been. The political situation in Russia is that all feedback mechanisms between the society and the government have been usurped or eliminated. There is no free media, there is no independent judiciary, the political system is not representing, there's vote rigging and other elements of oppressing the political freedoms. The people who are in power in Russia, they control all levers of control. They have massive financial resources, they control all branches of power. So in this environment, the democratic forces, including our organization, we obviously have been too weak to be the driving force of change and to be able to confront the regime head on. At the same time, we realized that such system cannot last forever, and the political system in Russia would be becoming more and more unstable and wouldn't be able to survive in foreseeable future. So our goal was to be able to be the most powerful political organization in Russia when such political transition starts, and to be able to make a difference and try to steer Russia on a normal democratic path of development. And I mean, there are many political analysts who make forecasts. What is the time frame? What is the scenario for this change? It's very difficult in a country like Russia. So we thought that we had to have a strategy that would be working regardless of how long we have to fight and what would be the eventual scenario for change. So we focused on a few things given the above. We had to increase our public recognition. We had to increase our support base. We had to build a powerful organization. We had to be flexible because the situation was always changing, and the normal recipes from developed countries were not working, were not really applicable to our political work. We had to create an alternative, a vision of better Russia compared to what we see today. And we had to establish and maintain moral authority. And Navalny and our team have become this most prominent opposition force because we did exactly that. We constantly were looking for new ways to attract supporters and volunteers. We were building an organization. When I started helping Navalny, he had just a small corporate law office with a few lawyers. And by the time that we were created extremist in 2021, we had more than 400 people throughout the country. We always sought to be in contact and in sync with democratically oriented intellectual elite of Russia. We have and had a team of advisors, including prominent economists, writers, and other opinion leaders. And we had to be involved in different activities. We call it playing on different chessboards because the usual political instruments were not available to us. So Navalny gained his recognition through anti-corruption investigation. And the political and economic corruption in Russia is intertwined. I'm talking about a situation when a regional governor can earmark the funds that were supposed to be spent on roads into the pockets of his crony businessmen. But in exchange for that, and the central authorities and the law enforcement turns a blind eye towards that. And at the same time, during the election day, he has to deliver a prescribed result for the party of power at the polling stations through whatever means possible. Our anti-corruption investigations focused first on graft and corruption in large state-owned companies, the largest Russian state-controlled banks, Gazprom, Rosneft. Then it moved to state procurement. One of our first projects was a project called Rospil, which is Russian SAW, where we crowdfunded a team of lawyers who would be monitoring the electronic procurement tenders, and we're looking for signs of suspicious tenders, and we're launching complaints against that. And some of our investigations really made the mark. In 2017, we made an investigation into property network of former president and at that time Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, which the value of which was estimated at over $500 million. And the video of this investigation clocked over 30 million views on YouTube. It actually led to hundreds of thousands of Russia who would take to the streets in mass protests in 2017 and 2018. And not just in Moscow, where most of political and protest activity was happening until then, but in some situations in up to 200 cities and towns throughout the whole Russia. Political activities, not just participating in elections, because it's very difficult for independent candidates to get on the ballot, but we started with a campaign in 2011 where parliamentary elections were scheduled to happen in December. And we made a campaign, United Russia, which is the main party in Russia associated with Putin. United Russia is party of crooks and thieves. This campaign, and we made it very loud for internet, for social media. This campaign, the analysts believe that it resulted in a 10% decrease in the final vote that United Russia got in the polls. Mayoral campaign of Navalny in Moscow mayor elections in 2013. Within a short period of time, we were able to get a very innovative campaign. More than 40,000 volunteers worked with us. And Navalny, despite running against an incumbent mayor who had all levers of power, he almost got to the runoff round with 28% vote. Then came presidential elections in Russia, which was scheduled for 2018. And by that time, Navalny had a conviction through a politically motivated criminal case, so he formally couldn't run. So we had a dilemma. Do we try to make a campaign, even though we knew that it was unlikely that he would be registered? But it was kind of a bold proposition. But we did it, and we made a very unique campaign for Russia, American style, 3 rallies in a day, then flight to another city, and like that, Navalny was campaigning for 2 months, and he didn't get registered. The elections were again skewed towards Putin, but this allowed us to create a network of regional offices in over 40 cities where we did local political work. Because independent forces, independent politicians in Russia can't have access to state media, we had to create our own media empire, which started with a blog of Navalny. And then we had regular newsletters by email, social media presence, newspapers during campaigns. But over time, around 2017, we noticed that video content was much more effective in spreading our message. And we became a sort of a Russian TV station. We launched a YouTube channel, and there were different formats. Sometimes it was long investigations, like about Medvedev Palace over an hour long, or it was short videos where we would talk about current political issues, about corruption cases, etc., etc. Probably the most viewed investigation was an investigation at Putin's palace right after Navalny returned to Russia and was arrested, which exposed sort of this ridiculous wealth and bizarreness of Russian power. A palace that cost over $1 billion to build in the south of Russia. And that video clocked over 100 million views. We had to have vision for the future. During our various political campaigns, we coordinated creation of political and economic program. with prominent Russian economists. And the focus was really, we're not left, we're not right, we are people of the common sense. We need to restore this feedback mechanism between society and power, free media, fair elections, independent law enforcement, independent judiciary, social inclusion. Russia is a country that's characterized by a very high level of inequality. There are dozens of billions in Moscow, whereas the average salary in Russia does not exceed $400 per month. State was very much present in the economy, in business, in people's lives. So we wanted to, one of the aspects of our programs is to get state out, because over 70% of Russian economy is controlled by state medals in your bedroom. There are laws on homosexual propaganda and all other, many other restrictions on just everyday people life. And then came August 2020, when Navalny was poisoned. He fell ill on a returning from a campaign trip from Siberia. He went into coma. It was kind of obvious that there was some foul play. After some haggling, he was evacuated to Germany. And it was the German chemists and doctors found out that he was poisoned by a military-grade nerve agent called Novichok, which was before that used in assassinations in Britain against Sergei Skripal. And so it was like Russian state put like a stamp, left a signature on the crime scene with this. Navalny was in coma for about 3 months. It wasn't unclear whether he would survive. It wasn't clear whether he would retain his abilities. Miraculously, he recuperated. And his story is really, after this, became sort of epic and got biblical proportions. He is assassinated by a powerful tyrant. He miraculously recuperates. He investigates his own assassination. In the movie, you can see it, but there is a call from Navalny, who is posing as a security officer and who is interviewing, who was at that time suspected people who participated in the poisoning, and he was asking questions: what's happened, what went wrong, why didn't he die? And the guy basically confessed during this phone call and told him how the nerve agent was applied and how they were trying to cover the tracks, etc., etc.
I highly recommend that part of the movie if you haven't seen it. This is really crazy. And it's not just in the movie, of course. There was a report at that time as well, so it's been known for some time, but the recording is absolutely astonishing.
So after a few months of recuperating in Germany, Navalny decides to return to Russia despite all threats. And right on the arrival, he is thrown into jail on illegal charges. Basically, he was accused that he wasn't doing his parole checkups at the local police stations in Russia while he was in hospital in Germany. So he was thrown in jail. But even so he has been in jail for 2 years, a bit more. But even from jail, he sends the message against Putin, and in the last year against the war. So the war, which not that many people expected, came in February of 2022. before that, shortly after Navalny was incarcerated, our organization, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which was operating throughout Russia, was deemed extremist. It became not safe for people who worked for us and with us to remain in Russia. So we had to close down the network of regional offices. We had to quickly evacuate people. So we established a new office in Vilnius, in Lithuania. And that is our headquarters since then. And after the start of the war, we had to restructure a bit of our work. We focus on just a few things. Of course, it's media work. We launched a new YouTube channel, Popular Politics, and altogether our YouTube channels get about 5 million subscribers, and in January they clocked 20 million unique viewers, which is really a lot for an independent YouTube channel, especially which is broadcasting from abroad to Russia. About 85% of our listeners are in Russia. We continued doing investigations. Shortly after the war started, we investigated a yacht that was moored in Italy. It was really a mega yacht costing over $200 million. And the peculiar thing that we discovered was that all the members of the crew of the yacht were members of Russian security services. So you can only think that no private businessman, however wealthy he or she is, wouldn't be able to afford it, or wouldn't be able to arrange it. So this yacht was in the name of a prominent Russian businessman, but it really was a yacht for Putin, just like this palace in south of Russia that nobody ever used. And so through our investigations, shortly after, Italian authorities have arrested this yacht. So our investigations in some cases do make a difference. Another area of our work is engaging with Western governments. A big part of that is sanctions work. We have a list of people which we believe should be sanctioned. It's now about 7,000 people. We have a meticulous procedure of creating this list and putting people on it. It's officials, it's ministers, deputy ministers, it's corrupt business people. And we also believe that we have been advocating for sanctions, for personal sanctions against people involved in corruption, human rights abuse for years. But before the war started, it really was a trickle. Even after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and annexation of Crimea and meddling in eastern Ukraine, it really was a trickle, while after the start of the war, it became more like an avalanche. And we think that the sanctions policy should be more nuanced, and people should have an off-ramp. And it's important for the West to try to get as many Russians to the side of good as possible. And we work on that by spreading the word of truth through our media channels. But we also think that business elite, we also should try to lure to the side of the West. And some people who have been sanctioned, but who make anti-war statements, who clearly state their position, and who haven't been involved in large-scale corruption and human rights abuse, could be unsanctioned. Another part of our work is so-called branches of Navalny, which is the same name that our regional organization had, the regional branches. But now, since all protest activity has been outlawed in Russia, we have to do it a bit differently. We have to do clandestine. So if you're a Russian citizen who are anti-war and who you want to make a difference, and whatever you are inclined to and can tolerate, you can post anti-war posters in your elevator shaft, or you can sabotage a local war recruiting office and put it on fire. And obviously, this is illegal in Russia. So if you want to register in our network, you have to do it through Tor browser, very secure things. And over 20,000 volunteers have signed up for that. And that's quite a unique and quite an amazing number of people who are willing to do something against the war, despite the repression in Russia. So, as I said, we cannot take Putin head on now, but we believe that we have the assets and ingredients for success. We have our supporters. It's about 20 million. It's difficult to assess this number, but we do it through different calls pre-war, through our database of supporters on social media, emails, etc., etc. We have a dedicated team of about 150 people, 70 of which are located in Vilnius. We have a recognized charismatic leader with undisputed moral authority, Alexei Navalny, who is now in prison, but still is in high spirits and sends his message against Putin and the war from jail. We don't have any time frame for political change in Russia. We have the ability to go as long as needed. And we strongly believe that the war, this brutal aggression that Putin has started, has brought forward political change, and we expect something to happen within 2 or 3 years. A few words about the war. I'm sure there will be more questions, but I'll just do bullet points. Few people predicted it, because really there was no reason for it. It's very irrational. It's not in the interest of, it will be hard to name a strata of Russian population who benefits from this war. Business elite have seen their fortunes decimated, their lifestyles turned upside down. White population is experiencing higher prices. Familiar Western brands have left Russia, and there is a constant stream of coffins coming from the battlefields of Ukraine. I believe that domestic considerations, solidifying Putin's support base, rallying around the flag, having the pretext to increase the repression of freedom were the drivers of this brutal and reckless invasion. It was only possible under an autocratic system. Should rather have any semblance of democracy, such an invasion would be possible. So what is the current situation? We're a year into this war. There are things that are positive. Russian military, despite expectations that they will win the war relatively quickly within days or weeks, it has suffered major setbacks throughout this year. At some point, Russian military occupied about 25% of Ukrainian territory. Now it's about 15%, so it has been pulled back. Ukrainian army is putting up heroic resistance and is quite well organized. Russian army and armament stock has been heavily depleted. Western support continues unabated. Despite concerns and Russia's energy war against the West, Europe has not frozen over this winter. But at the same time, there are a few negative aspects of this war. Russian economy has proven to be quite resilient. When experts at the beginning of the war predicted it will drop by, the GDP would drop by something like 10%, in reality it dropped about 2.5%. Russia has reserves of manpower, people who have been mobilized and who possibly will be more mobilized in the coming months. We live in a strange world. 2/3 of world population lives in countries that haven't condemned war or introduced any sanctions, that said something against Russia. We hear in the headlines all this support for Ukraine, but China, India, most Latin American countries, most African countries are really not taking sides in this conflict. There is no active opposition in Russia because you can be put in jail for basically going out in the street with a blank piece of paper or for reposting an anti-war message or article or a video. So what are the lessons of this year? It's really a policy of linear thinking. People were predicting what Putin would do, but very few people predicted that he would launch this full-scale war. When the war started, they thought that just the superior Russian military will overcome Ukrainians quite fast. That didn't happen. Ukrainians pushed back. There was some predictions of fast Ukrainian victory, but the war has been kind of in a stalemate for the last months. An important fact or factor is that the West is not fighting for Ukraine. This is not a charity. There's dozens of billions of dollars in financial support for Ukraine and in armaments and in other forms of help is really the benefits of that accrue to the West, maybe to a great extent to Ukraine, because if Putin wins and Ukraine loses, the cost of this world would be much higher than what the West combined spending of developed countries currently takes place. Putin has been the reason for losses of hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of higher energy expenditures, in terms of higher food prices, in terms of additional armaments that need to be produced and security measures, and not the least, of course, in Ukraine, the hundreds of billions of destroyed infrastructure and innumerable human costs of dozens of thousands of people who were dead or injured. I think that would be it for now. I think I've spoken for what, half an hour?
That's great, and this leaves us, yeah, fantastic. This leaves us 45 minutes for questions. So let me start. This is a really remarkable. I forget that we have an online audience. By the way, those of you who are online, feel free to pose your questions. They do come here, so we can have a different experience in this way. Remarkable overview of Russian domestic politics. You looked at what the Anti-Corruption Foundation has been doing. just the numbers that you air, tens of millions of views, hundreds of millions of illicit funds uncovered here and there, Putin taken on, etc. It gives a dramatic character to your presentation. You kind of put it, very matter of factly, but it does. But Anti-Corruption Foundation is a large part of Russian modern history, and you are part of this history. And this is, as a historian, I will be writing about this maybe 20 years from now. And of course, this is going to be
hopefully before that.
Well, of course, historians have to wait until documents appear. So we like documents, we like written evidence, but nevertheless, it's been fascinating. And of course, your discussion of the war in Ukraine is particularly interesting as well, to hear your view on this. Let me start with this while folks are thinking of their questions as well, which is an open conversation. But let me start by asking you about Ukraine. You mentioned that in recent months we have had something like a war of attrition develop. Russia has not won. Ukraine has pushed back. The moment Russia has been able to as well to hold the lines to a certain extent. If we do end up, and you did mention that it's important not to allow Putin to claim victory. We still need to figure out what that means. But suppose that Russia is able to freeze this conflict, or maybe not whether it's able, or maybe just this conflict freezes. And the confrontation, of course, between Russia and the West will continue. In a frozen situation, you will have this deep freeze that will descend onto Russia. There will be a new Iron Curtain. There's already a new Iron Curtain, effectively, that has descended. Under those circumstances, is it realistic to expect political change in Russia within 2 to 3 years? This is the timeline that you have given us.
Well, it of course would depend on what the actual situation of stalemate is, but the economic sanctions so far have had a mild impact on the Russian economy, but their effect will pile up. And the standards of living will deteriorate. Already, Russia has problems with the state budget, which had a record deficit in the beginning of the year. So people will not get happier.
You think people will kind of react to this by, you'll have a social movement effectively. It's not going to be like North Korea, where you can have people starving, but they still go and support Comrade Kim. You think that the Russians don't have this kind of tolerance and they will rise up?
I don't think it will be something like an Arab Spring when millions suddenly take to streets and overcome the security structures. I think it will take a combination of popular unrest and some sort of elite coup or elite revolution, because people in the elite, they are not happy with this situation either. As I said, there's no access to international capital markets. What do they do with their money? How do they adjust their lifestyles? With the conflict frozen, there will be no kind of future, no prospects for that. So I think this combination of elite disturbance and popular unrest will at some point lead to some sort of start of political transformation. Putin is 70, so he's not as agile as he was 20 years ago. And even though he is sort of has undisputed authority now, but I don't think this is very well liked, especially after this war that was handled by Russia so badly. So at some point he will become some sort of sitting duck in this situation.
And this question of public support for the war or lack thereof is very difficult to get to the bottom of. You have, on the one hand, sociologists like Greg Udin, for example, who basically claim that you cannot have proper public polling in a situation like Russia, or you have an autocratic regime, and people are just not going to tell you whether they dislike the war if you ask them, especially if they're threatened with a jail term for doing so. On the other hand, it seems to me anecdotally, and like you know, I'm sort of connected to Russia in anecdotal ways, i.e. talking to people in there. I do see a lot of support there, and I'm trying to understand where it comes from. I'm trying to figure this out, why there's still public support for the war. What kind of support is it? Is it just purely kind of ideological support? Oh yeah, we like this war until we're actually being sent there. But hey, they're being sent there, and still, there seems to be a degree of support for this war. How do you explain this, or what is your take on the relationship between the public in Russia, the regime, and this war?
Indeed, I think polling is obviously not possible. You don't get any sensible results in today's Russia. Our estimates, we have our own small sociology department that asks questions in a more indirect way. For instance, one of the questions that was asked in our polls, if there is additional, let's say, billion rubles in the budget, should it be spent on military, should it be spent on social projects, should it be distributed to people? And only less than 10% of respondents said that we should spend it on war and security. So this kind of indirect polling tells you something about the mood and the preferences of people. In our estimation, there's probably 20% of Russian population who don't support the war, but they cannot really openly say it. So it's a more conversation between friends. 10% who support the war for whatever reasons, and 70% who have been traditionally not interested in politics and who basically don't see any way to change the current situation.
Okay, well, that's great. So let's open the floor widely. We have some online questions already. I'll collect a couple of questions from the floor. Let's see. Let's start with Professor Hartman.
Yeah, thanks. I unfortunately have the same question that Professor Radchenko said about the transition. When you said 2 to 3, and then there was a pause. I thought, what do you say, weeks, months, years, or decades? And
Anything is possible.
anything
We have to be prepared for any eventuality.
Millennia.
That's what I wanted to push you for, because you were quite confident to say it will be 2 to 3 years, and this happens like this. Isn't it more sensible to do scenario planning? Under which conditions will the transition trigger what results? And when we talk about Russia and public opinion and so on, don't we need to talk about Russia in the plural? There's the Russia of the Moscow and St. Peter's elites. They're the ones who are very removed from, and wouldn't the different Russias trigger different possibilities for a post-Putin political scenario? So a bit of scenario planning, if you can.
I entered political life sometime in 2011. Navalny was in politics for a few years before that. During that time, over 10 years for him, 15 years past, there were always different scenarios. None of them really came true. So, as I said, our kind of strategy has to be work under different scenarios. We have people who are dedicated, for whom trying to bring change in Russia is part of their DNA. And our team works like that. Of course, we would like to discuss and ponder scenarios. It's more a job not for us, sort of the practitioners, who have to put out the next video, who have to prepare, political program like the one that Navalny outlined recently from jail. Restoring, it's really common sense. Restoring internationally recognized borders. Troops go back to Russia, Crimea it's very complicated issue of what to do with the Crimea, for example, which has been for 9 years under Russian control, but it has to be done. And
sorry, no, it's just to follow up on this, because I was kind of struck when this series of tweets came out from Navalny about Crimea. This, for me, this was unexpected. And the reason I thought it was unexpected is that previously there was a sense that Navalny would not do that for reasons of or for fear of losing political support in Russia, because Russians feel so strongly about Crimea, that Crimea should not be given away, returned to Ukraine, etc. And so Navalny, in deference to this public sentiment, would not take this position. Why do you think he took this position?
There's a famous phrase of Navalny that is often quoted, and which people quote him for, that after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, he said that Crimea is not a sandwich. It's you cannot just take it and then give it away. And it is not a sandwich, because it's a territory where about 3 million people live. It has already even then there was by polls support for Crimea to be part of Russia. Of course, the annexation was illegal, but to restore Crimea to Ukraine would be a very complicated process. And in this sense, it is indeed not a sandwich. But of course, during the war, Navalny felt compelled to have a more precise position, and the principle of internationally recognized borders, that if we want Russia to be a part of Europe, where it belongs by its culture, by its tradition, by its history, by its religion, and we want Russia to go back to the trajectory of development of a European country and more broadly Western civilization. And that means that Russia has to have internationally recognized borders, which means that Crimea should belong to Ukraine. And it wasn't clear, maybe it wasn't clear through his words in 2014, but it became clear through his latest statement.
I mean, that's very interesting. And those of you, I don't know if any of you have followed this, but there was a statement on Twitter. I guess he passes it through his lawyers. I don't know how it works, but he did post in English and in Russian a statement on Twitter about Crimea, arguing that basically Ukraine should be restored its borders of 1991 and not the borders of 2022, which of course are not legitimate international recognized borders. We have more questions in the back. Let's start. Yeah, can you say your name, and we'll get to Sean, and then we'll get to I'll take a couple of online questions.
My name is Leonard. Thank you for coming and joining us today. I'm wondering about the decision-making process that your team or whoever was involved after Navalny recovered and then decided to go back to Russia, and maybe what were the factors for both options, whether to stay outside of Russia and go back, and you maybe regret, or does the team regret taking the decision going back, because either you did not expect to be arrested that fast, or maybe you did expect for him to be arrested. So I'd be curious about the decision-making factors for this. Thank you.
There are a few considerations. At that point, for Navalny, who was barely recovered from 3 weeks of coma and poisoning with a nerve agent, to go back to Russia and face. It wasn't a certainty at that time that he would be incarcerated for a long time, but it definitely was a probability that he had to take into account. So it would be naive to expect that there would be some decision by committee on whether he should return or not. He was dealing with his own life and freedom, so it was of course his own decision. When he recovered from coma, I thought that it was my kind of duty as his friend, as his ally, to not to persuade him not to go to Russia, but to tell him that he had options, that maybe he should stay outside of Russia for longer. Maybe we could rearrange how we work with him not going back. But once I had a first conversation with him and he started making public statements, etc., it was clear that he was determined to return. And it's very natural if you follow what he has been doing throughout his life. He built a powerful organization in Russia. He has millions of supporters there. He has done nothing wrong. The work of his life was and is in Russia, so it was only natural for him to return. And this is the mindset that resulted in this decision.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me take maybe a question online. We have a couple of questions here. We have a question from an old friend of mine, Andrea Bernardi. Hi, Andrea. He is asking, how do you make sure that your organization is not infiltrated by the Russian security services?
We can't. The Russian security services are quite creative, and they have money to corrupt people. They have the law enforcement to pressure people, and they have sophisticated poisons to assassinate people. So the Russian opposition, of course, has structures infiltrated by people who are either direct agents of security services or who collaborate with them. We have a core team of people who have been working together for a long time. From now and then, we have situations where we uncover people who work for the security services, and we get rid of them in a good way. There have been a few public examples of this. If you just follow our history, I wouldn't get into that now. The way, the quality of our work is to us a benchmark that if we're infiltrated by not that much.
Thank you. Questions? Oh, sorry. I will come. Okay.
Thank you for your discussion. My question actually relates more to the documentary, which I was amazed by, as I'm sure everyone who watched it was. I'm curious if your team is still working in collaboration with Bellingcat, or if working in collaboration kind of with their resources and expertise to kind of further the opposition movement? And if you can talk about any of that work?
Right. So if you look at our organization, there are people who do different things. If we have like 130 people, probably up to half of that are people who are involved in media. It's quite a sophisticated production, several studios, sound engineers, video engineers, producers, hosts of various TV shows, etc. The investigation team has traditionally been quite small, very kind of secretive because of nature of their work. It's no more than 5 or 6 people. We have collaborated with Bellingcat. I think the investigation on Navalny poisoning was not the first example of our collaboration. And we will also collaborate with a few other less known investigative outfits, such as Insider, it's a Russian website which brought us many important investigations. Project Media, another one, whose recent investigation into Putin and his mistress Kabaeva, the mother of his 2 children, etc., etc. So we are in contact with various investigation groups. We exchange instruments and tools and approaches, and Bellingcat and Christo Grozev has been quite a pioneer in many ways in this area, combining social media work with sort of gray market for information on flights, on phone conversations, etc., etc. It really put investigations on a new level.
And once again, to advertise the documentary, he does go into this in the documentary. It's extremely interesting what you can get from this dark web in Russia. I've never tried. Maybe I should, explore this for myself.
We can help you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what I need, but it sounds like very exciting sphere for a historian, an aspiring historian. Right, Sean.
Thanks again. My name's Sean. I've heard that, or I've read that Putin's cult of personality is founded on 2 things mainly. One is a post-Soviet nostalgia that he can offer to Russian people, and the other is consumption that Russian people benefited from under his regime. My question is, do you think that those 2 pillars of his cult of personality are as strong today as they were 10 or 15 years ago? And do you think that a hypothetical next Russian premier has to appeal to those 2 same things still?
It's a fact that they're not, because the standards of living in Russia have been stagnating for over 10 years, since 2008, since the financial crisis. The growth of GDP, even up to the war, did not exceed 1.5% per year on average. The fast growth in living standards that Russian population was experiencing from beginning of 21st century for about 10 years, it has really stopped. Putin is quite unique in his position because he has really been the architect of this system of political and economic corruption that was established and then sort of facilitized in Russia, which is now quite remarkable. But if he's replaced for somebody, this new person would not have the same authority, because he really wasn't at the start and he wasn't building and holding it all together. So this replacement will have to seek support from different groups, from bureaucracy, from regional elites, from prominent business people, and also he needs popular support. Putin really the decision making in Russia is very centralized in him. But I think it can only be done with him at the helm. And the propaganda really amplifies the image of Putin as the irreplaceable ruler. And even Vyacheslav Volodin, which is Speaker of Russian Duma, said, if there is no Putin, there will be no Russia. So that's the kind of mentality that is installed through TV screens and other mass media, and now increasingly through internet, Telegram channels that are connected to state propaganda machine.
But you sort of have to wonder about this, because for many years there was part of the propaganda that was being pushed by Putin and his regime is that the 1990s were so bad. They were so bad. Therefore, look at how well we're living. At least it's not the 1990s. But now you can no longer really, this narrative doesn't seem to sell. I mean, for a start, the 1990s.
Actually, after the start of the war.
Well, exactly. Things have turned so bad. And secondly, who remembers the 90s? I mean, we remember the 90s, but like a lot of people here and that do not remember the 90s. So, there's a generational change that's happening. And now people are dying in Ukraine who were born under Putin, grew up under Putin, and went to Ukraine to die under Putin. So, you wonder whether that's
sure.
Yeah. This
and it's amazing how a capable authoritarian ruler and his sort of cronies can build an effective propaganda like that. One thing is this myth about the 90s. The other is glorification of Russia's role in the World War II. And the other is this demonization of the West and of Ukrainian, which is really based on very, very thin air.
Okay, so we've got a few. Oh my God, we've got lots of questions. We also have some online. So, well, let's please, whoever wants to go first.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. So I was wondering, what is your view on the Wagner group and you'll have to say that correctly. There's been some going back and forth and question marks whether he's like aligned with Putin still or not. What is your view on that? And how
The bad people.
I can imagine. How do you think that will develop?
So maybe not everyone knows who is Prigozhin. Prigozhin used to be some sort of acquaintance of Putin from his work, from when he started working in St. Petersburg in beginning of 90s. He is often called chef of Putin because he has background in restaurants. Over years, he became, I think he had a number of contracts with large Russian state companies on delivering food and food supplies to them. But over the last few years, he was tasked with organizing a private military company, Wagner, which first appeared during Russia's support of Ukrainian separatists and the meddling, the Russian covert operation in eastern Ukraine. But later, over the last years, expanded internationally. There's a significant presence of Wagner in several African countries. It's basically a private military company which operates on both on orders of Russian authorities, but also for its own profit. It grew in significance since the start of active war in 2022. It plays a significant role in Russian military efforts on battlefields of Ukraine. since the start of the war, Prigozhin has been very outspoken about his sort of conflict and rift with the Russian military command. He was complaining that they are not doing their job, that he's not getting the right ammunition, etc., etc. And this is, in many cases, very public. It flares up in his videos and his social media, in Telegram channels associated with him, and it's quite a remarkable thing that the two military components of Russian power projecting itself into Ukraine should work together, but they are really competing and hating each other. That's the feature of this war, I guess.
And we have questions over here. Hang on, over here, yeah.
So in the past, Navalny has expressed, and this was maybe 15 years ago, he's expressed some pretty extreme ethno-nationalist views, particularly regarding Muslims. As far as I'm aware, he's never openly disavowed his past statements. Do you think that these remarks conflict with the goal of establishing the opposition as a moral authority?
There were several unfortunate statements in the beginning of his political career that he made, or I think that there was just a few, for many of them. He really was, during the start of his political career, one of his political ideas was to make the Russian nationalism into a political force that would replace this autocratic regime of Putin. And he was participating in nationalists' marches and mass actions. One of the clauses in our political program was introduction of visa regime with countries of Central Asia, from which there was a big inflow of migrants into Russia. However, from the big wave of mass protests in Russia at the end of 2011, 2012, his political position has become more mainstream, and his advisors include people from all nationalities of Russia, and our team is very multinational, so it's very misplaced to portray him as some sort of a chauvinist or xenophobic person.
Meryl, yeah, just in the back here.
Yeah, I have a question because even though you have a very pro-Ukrainian or anti-war stance, there is a lot of criticism from Ukrainian activists that the Russian opposition in general, but also Navalny in particular, is not anti-war enough. And that the statements are in general, there's a lot of criticism against that. And I'm wondering like what your response to that is, and also what your strategy more broadly is to engage with Ukraine and Ukrainian activists.
I don't think we need to go far and speculate a lot, but we just have to look at his recent statement less than a month ago, I think, maybe about a month ago, where he was outlining his position in Ukraine. It was very clear and precise. He was condemning the war as the brutal aggression, as the war crime. He was saying that the border between Ukraine and Russia has to be restored to 1990 war borders, to the internationally recognized borders. He was calling for persecution of war criminals who committed atrocities as part of Russian army and Russian paramilitaries in Ukraine. He was calling for reparations to be assessed and established that Russia would pay to Ukraine. I think that's a clear statement from a Russian politician on this issue that you can get. Of course, the Ukrainians feel a lot of animosity against Russia and Russians because of this brutal aggression. And I think that it's natural for Ukraine opinion of many Ukrainians to be biased against any Russians, and we accept that. But I don't think you can really say that Navalny is not enough anti-war or not pro-Ukraine in this conflict.
Okay, so we've got, maybe I'll take one online. We've got very little time, actually. We've got about 10 minutes left. So somebody in the back wanted to raise a question. Oh, let me collect a few questions so then we can kind of start wrapping up.
Thank you. As an organization that is headquartered outside of Russia, I'm sure you partner with non-Russian peoples and institutions, and they receive donations from outside of Russia. How do you balance working with possible allies outside of Russia and maintaining your domestic legitimacy as a Russian-driven opposition and not seen as anything else?
Let's get a couple more questions. Do you want to? Okay, let's just.
My question is kind of different, but I've been researching on transnational movements that are fostering an anti-abortion agenda, and the Russian Orthodox Church and the oligarchs are play an important role in it. And I was wondering if you could explain whether there is a straightforward connection between the Russian Orthodox Church and the role it plays in the political environment in Russia, or if there is no direct connection and it's just through the oligarchs.
Connection between Russian Orthodox Church and
The political environment in Russia. So like obviously the political elite, and whether this is an institutionalized connection or if it is more simply big oligarchs with.
And let me throw in just one question from online, so we address this audience as well. We have one question here from Sarah Polidoro, who is asking whether you cooperate with any Russian civil society organizations. Are there any civil society organizations in Russia? Have people escaped? What's happening there? We'll get 3 questions.
Sure. So how are we working from outside of Russia, and how does that affect our standing in Russia? It's not by choice that we had to leave Russia. Throughout all of the history of our organization until mid-2021, we had been a Russian organization, Russian NGO, and we have been collecting donations only from Russian citizens. That had to change abruptly when we were deemed extremist. We had to relocate. But people who our supporters, people who follow us, they understand that the kind of activities that we were doing in Russia are not longer possible there. Since the start of the war, people get arrested for much less than what we have been doing. And our friends and allies who were not, Alexei Navalny is a political prisoner. We have several others from our team who are in prison now, but also a few independent, democratic-minded politicians like Ilya Yashin and Vladimir Karamurza are also in Russian jail. So I don't think anybody can point a finger at us and say, well, you could continue work in Russia, you shouldn't have gone abroad, etc. And we were able to reassemble our crowdfunding infrastructure in the West, and we get about half of donations through crowdfunding donations from $5 to $200 through subscription, through mailing, through other campaigns, and another half comes from donors who donate from $20,000 to $1 million dollars or euro a year, and that constitutes our budget of about 5 million euro per year.
And on the other questions?
Right, the church. The church has been part of Russian power structure. It's not a recent phenomenon. It has been like this for centuries, and it's no different today. On the surface, Russian Orthodox Church is the dominant religion, and people associate themselves with the Russian Orthodox. But if you look at statistics, less than 2% of Russian people go to church regularly. So there's a big mismatch. It's more of a tradition than really following a religion as it's supposed to be. And of course, the Russian Orthodox Church repeats the narrative that state propaganda puts out. But I don't think it plays any sort of independent role in forming the imperialist and pro-war agenda in Russia.
Is it, I mean, my impression of the Russian Orthodox Church is that it's very corrupt. Are you ever tempted to investigate?
Of course, there's a common internet meme of golden dust that was accumulated in apartments that were adjacent to the apartment of one of the top church officials when they were doing some renovations, because there was so much gold involved in this reconstruction. So it is corrupt, but Russian psych is a peculiar thing. It does not affect people's affiliation with the Russian Orthodox Church, maybe because people don't really never had experience or history of civil society structures, independent movements. They have to rely on something. They have to rely on some tradition, and the Orthodox Church fulfills that need.
Was there another question? Something?
Civil society. Do we interact with the civil society? There's not many, or maybe none, real civil society organizations in Russia. Our work is quite focused. We don't do many things, but we focus on a few aspects, and we try to do them well. We do media work. We try to do it well through the channels that are available to us, mostly YouTube. And we have professional studio. We have a big team, so we interact with a lot of journalists. We conduct investigations. Some investigations we do in collaboration with other investigative outfits. But with civil society, we don't do human rights protection. I mean, we are always, of course, in favor of it, but we are more practical people who do practical political work. It's just different
different focus.
All right, well, we're at the end of our time, so it just remains for me to just say that thank you. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Thank you for answering questions. So lots of questions. Some, some quite tense. I can see from the direction of them. It's just wonderful to have you here. It's just wonderful to have this conversation about Russia's direction, with somebody who's actually involved in trying to shape it. Will you please join me in thanking our speaker today, Vladimir?
Thank you.
Yes.